What is going on, guys? Blink here, back with a new guide. In this guide, I'll be explaining ways of spotting bad pushes and shooting them down. Also, the V-Bucks giveaway is still going on, so make sure you visit the link in the description to enter. And lastly, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications as I post an Amazon gift card code in the comments every time I upload. By turning on notifications, you'll have a way better chance of getting here first and redeeming that code. Anyways, guys, let's get to this guide. So, this first scene won't have cinematics as it's a little before the update, but the rest of the video will. Now, there are players coming out of the storm, and we engaged onto them to not allow them to heal up. I built up, and this opponent was building into my stairs. That's when it's the easiest to engage onto someone, as they're exposing their whole body the whole way up. Their stairs are under my fort, which doesn't block them from having cover. Standing on the edge, never let him build over me, because as you guys know, if you try building a staircase when someone's inside it, it won't build it. So I was able to go through it, which made the fight very easy. Now, the main issue here is that the player never reacted to my shots, just kept building up. They just never knew what to build next. So make sure you guys have a plan in these types of situations. I'll show you guys the two best ways of defending yourself if you're in this situation. So the first way is actually a method I've talked about in a previous video. When you see your opponent, place a wall down and then a floor and then a staircase. Now you're a story higher than you previously were. If you've blocked the vision of your opponent from seeing you, then keep proceeding to build towards your opponent with stairs. Now, if your opponent can still see you, do it again until you're out of his vision. I won't talk about this method too much as I've explained it in a previous guide. So this next method is one I've never talked about, and it's one of my favorite ways of defending myself from players above. I'll show you a full-on building fight with this example. And one more thing, this example is exactly the same one as you see at the start of the video, except the player above me was me and I'm the opponent that was building up. So as you're building up, and once you spot your opponent, you want to place a wall down in front of you as soon as you can, and place another wall to the side you're going to be building towards just for that extra support. Then place two stairs down, and once you're above that first wall, you're going to want to place two more walls down to block your opponent from having vision on you. Now jump up and place a floor under you, and then two more walls in the approximate direction your opponent is. Add that staircase and you should be above your opponent. Now make sure you peek over as soon as possible to find your opponent in bad positions and to take advantage of them. I see way too many people building and building and building and not peeking. You gotta build and analyze the situation and then build again if needed. If not, put the pressure on your opponent. Now if you still weren't above your opponent, then repeat the same method of building I explained. Build those walls again and just repeat the method. Now if your opponent's able to outbuild you and is basically directly above you, then make sure to add floors on top of you, just like I've shown in my last guide. Everything I talk about is methods I utilize in my games all the time. I try to give you guys the best ways of gaining the advantage. So let me show you guys a fighting example. I got off my chug jug and my opponents were already holding the high ground. Now I built up and tried stretching a wall in front of my opponent. That way I can continue building. It wasn't possible adding another wall in front of me and would have not helped either, as my opponent was directly above me. This is when placing floors above you is super important. You'll stop any shots from getting towards your head. Now keep rebuilding the floor if he shoots it down, and once he needs to reload, edit your way up and add walls in his direction and block him from building any higher by adding a double staircase. Don't just add the one staircase you're standing on. Stretch the second one every time so it blocks him from building any higher. Now both opponents were directly below me, and this is where rocket launchers are most deadly. That's when they need to add floors above them and add walls to avoid the splash damage. So let's conclude these examples. When your opponent's in front of you, then use the first two methods of pushing to get above. Now if your opponent's basically directly above you, then you're going to need to add floors over top, because walls are non-existent. They won't really help the situation, so make sure you're adding the floors. Now back to that first example. What if I don't notice the player building up in time? If you don't notice it, then at the last second place a floor instead of shooting. I've shown this floor placing method in older guides. I'll explain it a little here. So yeah, you might be able to inflict some damage onto your opponent, but if they get above you in the process, then they'll have time to heal and inflict some damage back onto you, and now you've taken some damage and you don't have the high ground to defend yourself. So what you'll want to do is block them from building any higher by placing a floor down and editing a floor as you pop them in the head with your close range weapon. Now I pulled out my pump, and the only time you can pull out your pump in editing situations is if your opponent isn't paying attention. Because of the new pump delay, your best bet is pull out the tactical instead. If your opponent's prepared for the edit, then yeah, don't pull out your pump. Make sure it's the tactical shotgun or the tactical SMG. Now what if the situation was flipped? So say your opponent places the floor over top of you. What you want to do is build around the roof by placing the floor directly behind you and rotating around and building right back up once you have a clear opening. This is the quickest and the best way of countering your opponent's floors. Now say we flip the situation again. I'm back in my fort, and what I can do instead of placing one floor, I can place a bunch of floors around the area, just so it stops my opponent from building around my floor. Then use the edit tool to see if you can catch him hiding below. So all these examples we've talked about have one thing in common, which is every last staircase will connect to the fort. So what I mean by this is if you're building up and you know that no matter how much you keep building, your stairs will connect to your opponent's fort, then you know you're not in a good situation from the start. And the easiest way to tell is if simply your opponent can see you the whole way up. So to avoid your opponent from pressuring you, notice you're in a bad position right away and use one of the two methods I've shown at the start of the guide to safely get above your opponent before he even notices you. The quicker you say, I better be building a little higher to avoid getting hit, then the better chance you'll even have to get to your opponent without any risks. Now that's if you're in that position. Try to avoid being in this position and needing to use the two methods from the start. All you need to get used to doing is building a little earlier. That way, every time you place a stair down, your opponent can't see you. So let's get into knowing when it's a good time to shoot your opponent's stairs down. In this situation, my opponent ended up building up, and I never built up as I was a little late. Now, I could have built up a little late and just placed the floor above my head as I built up, but I was able to spot a better way of getting the high ground back. Since my opponent built too high and never added a wall in front of his stairs, I was able to shoot down his stairs without exposing myself. And after dropping him down, I instantly built above him while adding the floors in front of my stairs, as they are important to always add. By just noticing faulty building, you can change the situation from being really bad to really good in an instant. So make sure you guys notice these building mistakes and take advantage of them. Now I'll show you guys one last example. So this example was actually in the intro of my last video, but I went back to it because it's a pretty good one for this guide. So once again, I can see this player's stairs and I'm covered by a tree, which is even better for me. Even if that tree wasn't there, I would have still shot that staircase down. The high ground is insanely good if you know how to utilize it. Once this opponent built away from his support structure, he was vulnerable to falling to his death because there wasn't anything under him. When you know your opponent is somewhere down below, find them first and don't just build away from your support structure. Here, let me show you guys what I mean. So I've created this massive structure, and say my opponent is somewhere down below. If I built just this one staircase to peek my opponent, I'm vulnerable to falling to my death because there's absolutely nothing under me. If my opponent somehow has an angle on my stairs, he can shoot them down, resulting in me falling to my death. What you guys want to do instead is build yourself a 1x1 around all the support. You have less chance of falling to your death because the structures will usually have more than one line of support. So back to the example, I shot the staircase down and my opponent fell on top of the tree. Now if he's got low HP, he can't really do anything at all because if he falls, he's just gonna fall to his death. I shot him down a bit and I could have left him up there, but I finished him off as there's absolutely nothing he can do. Make sure you guys are not building yourself into disadvantages while holding the high ground. Figure out if what you're gonna do has any risks before doing it. So to conclude this guide, we've covered how to avoid taking damage while pushing and spotting faulty support. Hopefully I've helped some of you guys out with this guide, and a like and a sub would be greatly appreciated as it does help me a lot. Anyways guys, thanks for watching and I hope you have a great rest of your day or night, and I'll see you on the next one.